Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted more depth and significance in your life, then do we have the Power of Meaning show for you. Today I'll be talking with Emily Esfahani Smith, columnist, editor, and author of one of the most meaningful books I've ever read, The Power of Meaning. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about crafting a life that matters. That plus we'll talk about Big Papi, feeding giraffes, knights in shining armor, what in the world's the Ikea effect, good fences and great neighbors, and why you want to be extra careful when you compliment another's dervishes' possessions. So welcome to the show, Emily. Are you ready to shine?
I am. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Well, thanks so much for being here and a mighty woohoo! So before we dive right into things, what was life like living in a Sufi meeting house as a child?
So yeah, I grew up in a Sufi meeting house, and Sufism, for those who might not know, is a school of mysticism that's associated with Islam. And the most famous Sufis are probably the whirling dervishes. The poet Rumi was also a Sufi. So it's this kind of, mystical practice. And living in a meeting house meant that twice a week, Sufis came over to our home, dervishes as they're called, and they would sit on the floor and meditate as Iranian music played. And when they weren't meditating, they were, telling stories from their own lives or from the lives of great Sufi mystics and saints. Rituals kind of governed a lot of their daily life, and a major part of their practice was, service to all through acts of love and compassion. So you can imagine that it was kind of an enchanting childhood. It was a childhood full of warmth and love. I was surrounded by people who were leading really meaningful lives, and I think that that probably did a fair share to leading me down this journey to writing this book.
I was so excited when I read that. When I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, I had a friend, former roommate, who would bring me once a week to the Sufi meeting house. And there would be singing and dancing and eating, and it was just filled with such incredible love.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. That sounds about right.
So why in the world do you want to be careful when you compliment another's dervish's possessions?
So Sufis are so kind of devoted to service and to loving kindness that, if you, among the ones who I knew anyways, that if you kind of said, oh, I love that scarf, they would kind of take it right off their own shoulders and give it to you. And, if you said, oh, I like those earrings, they would take it off and give it to you because they derived kind of joy from that that small act of kind of kindness and love.
So yes, I can see why you'd want to be careful. What does it mean to a Sufi to love and adore God?
So for Sufis, they consider themselves on this journey towards God, this ultimate reality that they're trying to grow closer to and even seek union with. So to love God means to love all of his creation and every human being that's a part of it. So that's where the service and the loving kindness comes in. But it also, a big part of that is kind of also diminishing your own sense of self and ego, because that the self and the ego can be barriers to love. So beyond, loving kindness and service, they also meditated, like I mentioned. And the point of that meditation practice was to kind of help them diminish their sense of self and to grow closer to that higher reality.
I love your background here, and I'm excited to dive into it because you bring a very unique perspective when you started diving into positive psychology. So before we get there, what was life like when you moved? I guess it was from Montreal to the U.S.
Yeah, so we moved out of the Sufi meeting house and we came to New Jersey, which was a very different kind of culture. It wasn't, the loving community that I had known growing up. Rather, there were many wonderful things about it, but it was very competitive and kind of driven by a different set of values than I had been used to growing up in the Sufi meeting house. So, in New Jersey, when I was in high school, my peers were kind of obsessed with, success and status and their own personal happiness. And they kind of chase these things, relentlessly. And I think that, I kind of ended up getting caught up in that culture a little bit myself, while at the same time wondering, well, okay, so, we're not living immersed within the Sufi meeting house culture anymore. It's a little bit more distant from us. So what does it mean in this new context to lead a meaningful life? How can we lead meaningful lives if we don't have kind of the everyday, rigor of a spiritual practice kind of guiding us along?
So is that what brought you into positive psychology? And with your background, what were you seeing once you got involved with it?
Yeah, so I got to positive psychology eventually. First, I kind of, as I started thinking about, whether can you lead a meaningful life without, religion and without spirituality, I was first drawn to philosophy. And so I studied philosophy in high school and then in college. And what I realized, though, was that philosophy today has kind of abandoned the pursuit of meaning and of what a good life is, even though that pursuit, that eternal quest, had driven it for thousands of years. Today, philosophers are kind of caught up in really, small and esoteric questions like, does artificial intelligence exist? Language games, logic puzzles, things like that. So I felt this dissatisfaction in philosophy. And eventually what I discovered, though, was that this question of the good life had been kind of picked up by positive psychology, which is the science of how to lead a good life, basically. It studies how we can lead better lives using the scientific method. And so that led me to get a master's in that. And it was in that field where I really started discovering that there's a rich body of research around what it means to lead a meaningful life, and that I wanted to kind of bring that research to others to help them find meaning.
So it's interesting because when you talk about the philosophy there and also what you experienced in New Jersey, and our show is hosted in New Jersey. So I love everybody around me, but I see that culture as well. It sounds like the philosophy that you were studying or that others around you were studying was a, for lack of another term, purpose-driven philosophy. Right,
exactly. Yeah, it's yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think we all hear the word purpose a lot, and we can, use the term purpose and meaning interchangeably. And one of the things that I wanted to do in writing my book, The Power of Meaning, was figure out, well, what exactly are the building blocks of a meaningful life? How is purpose different from meaning, or is it the same?
Thank you. So I'm going to pronounce, I apologize for the pronunciation of this word in advance, but what is eudaimonia and where did it come from?
That's pretty good. So eudaimonia is an ancient Greek word, and it means human flourishing. So Aristotle was one of the great ancient Greek philosophers, and he said that the end of man isn't to lead a life of happiness; it's to pursue eudaimonia, which is the flourishing life. And eudaimonia often gets translated as happiness. So Aristotle is often taken to mean that the point of a life is to be happy, that we should all be aspiring for happiness. But actually, he was very critical of the kind of hedonic idea of happiness that's so popular today. And his idea of a good life, eudaimonia or human flourishing, was all about contributing to the community, being involved in it. He thought of the good life as an active life, a life in which you're doing specific things to actualize the potential that's inside of you so that you can kind of be an engaged citizen, an engaged member of your community.
Thank you. And it brings up an excellent question that makes you step back and pause. Can meaningfulness and happiness be at odds then?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think today most people, they think that they want to be happy, and we get the message constantly that we should all be pursuing happiness and that the whole point and purpose of life is to be happy. But I think that this kind of gets things wrong. If you look at the things that occupy our time, that we willingly devote ourselves to, they're not necessarily things that bring us happiness. So, if you're an athlete and you're trying to get as great as you can at your sport, if you're practicing a musical instrument, if you're a writer, if you decide to have children and raise them, these are things that are effortful, they're stressful, and yet we do them because they bring meaning to our lives, and they ultimately leave us with a deeper sense of well-being that's a little bit more enduring and complex than the the positive emotions that define happiness.
Thank you. Let's go from there. Let's talk about the meaning crisis and what the crisis of hopelessness and misery, unfortunately, we're experiencing today.
I think that, that this past election was a really good. It really brought to light the kind of the misery and the just the sense of hopelessness that so many millions of people around the world are dealing with. We know that people are really struggling with loneliness, that there's a real lack of a sense of belonging in our culture today. We know that, the opiate drug abuse has become epidemic. Rates of suicide reached a 30-year high recently. Rates of depression have been rising for decades. Self-harm, almost like any measure that, researchers have to measure, malaise and misery has seemed to be on the uptick right now. And I think that there is kind of really interesting and compelling research that suggests that what's driving some of these indicators of kind of depression and anxiety and ennui, to use the French word, is this sense that people aren't sure what makes their lives meaningful. There are millions of people who, according to one survey, don't have a good sense of what makes their lives meaningful, what gives their lives purpose. And this is a problem because if you don't, then you kind of end up drifting through life. You're unsure what the bigger reason or point of your existence is. There's nothing that kind of is drawing you forward.
It's fascinating. I just stepped back as you were saying that, and it occurred to me that we're at an all-time peak so far for technology. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and it's actually separating and distancing us from others and maybe from ourselves as well.
I do think that technology can have that effect. It can certainly isolate us. It can distract us from going out and leading meaningful lives. If we feel like our lives aren't meaningful, we can kind of, cover up that feeling, that vacuum, by just going to Facebook and scrolling through. It gives us something to do, but it's kind of this like false source of meaning because yes, it is something to do. It is a purpose. Your purpose could be like being on Facebook all the time. And yet, is it really like a meaningful purpose? No. So it's certainly a danger. At the same time, it can connect us to others. Technology has, helped lift people out of poverty. So there is a good, but there's also a bad side to it too.
Yeah, and I can't pick on it too much because without the technology, we wouldn't be speaking right now. We wouldn't be sharing this show with the world. Let's go from there. And this one was fascinating, although sad, which is wealthier and happier nations and suicide rates.
Right. So there's, we were just talking about kind of all the rising hopelessness and misery. And there was a really fascinating study that kind of probed into it a little bit more deeply. And what the researchers found was that, countries that, they looked at suicide rates, they looked at happiness levels, they looked at meaning levels, and they found that what's driving the suicide rate in wealthy countries is not happiness or unhappiness. It's not like how happy people are. It's whether they lack meaning in their lives. So it just goes to show that, where we may be striving for happiness, but maybe happiness isn't actually what's like, the lack of happiness isn't causing this despair. It's a lack of meaning. People need meaning in order to feel like their lives have worth.
That makes sense. From there, can you tell us what's the Ikea effect?
The Ikea effect. So if anyone has ever, bought a piece of Ikea furniture, then they know that bringing it home and assembling it is a real project that kind of takes a lot. It's a labor of love. And scientists have talked about how the reason IKEA does this is because when people kind of invest in something, when they put their effort into something, they actually end up valuing it more. So even though IKEA furniture is kind of, cheap or whatever, when you kind of take the effort into, building it, it's more meaningful to you. So you did it and, you kind of invested part of yourself in it. And likewise, like in research studies, scientists have found that when people, invest in something, when they put effort into it, they think that it's more meaningful. So the idea is that a meaningful life is a life where you do invest effort. It can be a hard life. It can be a stressful life because, like I was saying earlier, some of the things that we do and we devote ourselves to are things that don't necessarily make us happy moment to moment, like raising kids or, practicing a musical instrument, but they bring us meaning. So, and on those lines, kind of with the challenges of putting together IKEA furniture, what's the importance of facing our challenges head on then? The importance is that they are opportunities for us to build meaning. Whenever we experience adversity, there's all kinds of ways that we could respond. We could just, say, well, this happened and I'm going to ignore it because it'll make me unhappy to dwell on it. Or we can say, no, like this happened, this is happening, and I want to understand why it happened. I want to understand how it changed me. And I want to see, like, is there anything that I can learn from this to help me lead a more meaningful life?
Thank you. I want to talk briefly about not so briefly, for a little bit, about the 4 pillars of meaning. And wonder if we can start out with belonging. Maybe you can tell us about chronic loneliness and infants. This was a mind blower.
So the pillars of meaning, maybe I'll just back up first and say that. So when I wrote this book, I wanted to really understand what the building blocks of a meaningful life are. So what are the things that we have to have in our lives in order for them to count as meaningful? And in the research that I did, it was these 4 themes that came up again and again. One of them was belonging. So, we have this idea that, like, I think it comes from, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that, like, you first need to, satisfy your basic survival needs before you can go on and satisfy your more social and existential ones. But the research suggests that that's not really true at all, that having relationships are as critical for our survival and our well-being as food and water and shelter are. And, you asked about the study about children. So, in the early part of the 20th century, a researcher went into an orphanage where children did not receive very much care, kind of affectionate care at all. In fact, there was this zeitgeist at the time in the culture where affection was discouraged among children, adults to children, because they thought that it would, kind of ruin the character of the child, making them weak and, spoiled, and B, that it would spread germs to the child. So you didn't want to do that. So in these orphanages and in many hospitals, they kind of put curtains between the beds that the children were sleeping in. Adults rarely handled the kids. And when they did, it was kind of in, a white suit with like gloves and things like that. And the result was that children ended up getting sick and dying at higher rates. A psychologist did a study where he compared kids in an orphanage like that to kids in a prison nursery. So the kids in the nursery, their mothers had been imprisoned because they committed a crime, and yet they were placed in this nursery and could kind of play with each other, and they would be tumbling all over each other, a ripe breeding ground for germs and all those horrible things they were afraid of. And yet the kids in the nursery were more socially adjusted after a period of time, less likely to die, just better overall health, both psychologically and mentally, whereas the kids in the orphanage were much more likely to die, to get sick. Later on, they showed signs of maladaptive social behavior. So not having someone to care for them and to love them, not having someone that they kind of belong to, really took a toll on their health and on their psychological well-being.
Thank you. It's so fascinating. It also goes along the whole theme of the hygiene hypothesis as well, which is get them dirty, expose them to that, get them touching each other, playing with each other. Can you go from there? Can you tell us about what are high-quality connections?
High-quality connections are these kind of small moments that you can have with somebody that really build a sense of belonging and a sense of meaning. So, I think that when we hear the term belonging and relationships that have belonging, we tend to think about our major relationships, like your relationship to your partner, to your parents, to your kids, to your closest friends. But really, belonging can be tapped in any interaction that we have with somebody else. So, recently I was at a Starbucks and I started having a conversation with the person who was checking me out, taking my order down. And it was wonderful. We asked each other how we were doing. We kind of made a joke, and we both ended up leaving that interaction feeling a little bit more elevated. And the reason is that we didn't just treat it as a transaction. We kind of took a moment to both slow down and to value one another, to treat each other as human beings. So these are high quality connections, and they're really kind of potent sources of meaning. And they're sources of meaning that we can tap into all around us, because we're always kind of having these loose bonds, loose connections with people.
There's a term that's been coming up a lot for me lately, which is I see you. And that is when you truly see somebody, when you see the value, when you see them as the human being, how much they light up. But in this interaction with Starbucks, you're showing that as you see the other person, they are seeing you. It's coming right back to you.
Exactly, exactly. So we should, we should treat everyone like they have intrinsic worth, because that's what belonging is, and that's what being a good person is.
Thank you. So let's go from there. Let's go to your second pillar. Let's go to purpose. And what in the world is zoo enrichment?
So purpose is a goal that organizes our lives, and that usually involves making a contribution to other people or to the world in general. So it's about doing things that give back to the world in some way. And I open my chapter on purpose by talking about a woman who spends most of her days cleaning up animal waste, shoveling it from one place to another. She has really long hours. Her body often aches after she works. And yet she told me that this is her dream job. And she is a zookeeper at the Detroit Zoo. And she cares there for kangaroos, wallabies, and giraffes. So her job is basically, kind of a manual labor job. But when I talked to her about what gives her a sense of meaning in life, she told me that her purpose isn't cleaning up animal waste. It's doing everything she can to care for the animals and to make their lives as good and as healthy as possible. And that in this particular case means making sure that their yards and their stalls are clean so that they can be healthy. This woman, her name is Ashley, she thinks of her job as a calling. So even though it's, so-called manual labor, dirty work, as some people, disparagingly call it, she thinks of it as a calling.
Very cool. What was it like being an inch nose to nose with a giraffe?
It was pretty scary for a second. I was standing there with Ashley, and we were talking, and she was kind of feeding the giraffe, and I was taking down notes, and the giraffe was very curious and came right over and put its nose on my notebook, and then lifted its face and looked straight at me, and we kind of had this moment of I see you, I guess, like you said, and then he went off and galloped away. But it was a pretty cool experience.
Very cool. What are, I don't know how you segue from giraffes to more on purpose, but what are the two dimensions of purpose?
The two dimensions are, one, the goal-orientedness. So purpose is really it's something that we do that kind of lies in the future and we're moving towards. So, one person's purpose could be working on a cure for cancer. Another person's purpose could be, being a great parent or being a great leader, just being a good person. Or someone like Ashley might have a specific purpose of, caring for animals. So the goal-oriented nature is the first part. The second part is contributing to the world. So the goal has to contribute to the world in some way. So in Ashley's case, it was about caring for the animals. So using her talents to help them lead better lives. For me as a writer, I kind of think of my purpose as of spreading ideas that help people lead better lives. So again, there's that kind of pro-social connection.
Excellent. And I guess it's a perfect segue. What was the goal of writing this book then?
I really wanted people to figure out how they could on their own lead more meaningful lives. We all have this yearning to know that our lives aren't meaningless, that they amount to something. And I think the question for us is, well, how do we lead meaningful lives? And I wanted to write a book that would show people how.
Thank you. So who in the world was Big Papi, and what's Cos Athletics?
So Big Papi. So this is the story of Cos Marte, who is one of the people I interviewed for my book. And he was a drug dealer who ended up getting arrested. And in prison, he was told that he would probably die soon because he was obese and very unhealthy. And so that was a wake-up call for him. And he started working out regularly in prison. And he just thought that it was really, empowering, that he could do things to change the course of his life. And even more empowering was other prisoners who were in similar situation, overweight, unhealthy. He started helping them get more healthy. And one of the people who he helped was this guy named Big Papi, who, Cos helped him kind of get so in shape that he lost all this weight. And Big Papi came to him and crying, saying, I was always one of the fat kids, and you helped me not be that anymore. Thank you. So in prison, Cos realized that, I thought that, I would be living my dream as a drug dealer, making all these millions of dollars a year, which he did. But really, that's not the same thing as leading a purposeful life. And I felt so good, he realized, helping these people, climb back from obesity, become healthier, that he wanted to do that when he got out of prison. So he started a little fitness company in his neighborhood in New York. And now it's kind of really blossomed into a wonderful business that reaches, thousands of people. And, it's funny, he was dealing drugs in that same neighborhood, 10 years ago or whatever, kind of affecting people's lives in that way. And now he's back in the same neighborhood, affecting their lives in a very different way.
Woohoo! I love that. So you have a very powerful line here. You say, not all of us will find our calling, but that doesn't mean we can't find purpose.
Right. So I think we, a lot of us anyways, put a lot of pressure on ourselves to find our one meaning and purpose in life, to have a calling that really just lights our lives up. Like Ashley with, she knew from a young age that she wanted to be a zookeeper, and she's pursued that goal and is now doing it. And she thinks of it as a calling. But, that's only 1/3 of people feel that way about their work. Only 1/3 of them have a calling orientation. The rest of us, though, that doesn't mean that we're not going to find meaning in our lives or meaning in our work. We just might find it in other ways. So the research shows that what really gets people to feeling like their work is meaningful is if their work has some kind of service component. So if it contributes to the community or to the world in some way. And we can all kind of craft that narrative for ourselves of how our work is contributing to the world. So I write about one study of people at a university call center who are calling alumni to help raise money for the school. So this might not seem intrinsically meaningful because you're calling, you're constantly getting rejected, it's kind of demoralizing. And so the researchers came in and they told half of the call center employees that their work is helping this particular student who's on financial aid, that the more money they raise, the more students like this will be helped out. And they didn't share that narrative with the other group. And what they found was that the people who thought that their work was helping others ultimately were more productive and more motivated in their job. So there's something about knowing how your work connects to something larger that helps you feel like your work is more meaningful.
So then it's really important that we view our opportunities, what comes our way, to reframe them or reframe our tasks as opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. Reframe them as an opportunity to contribute in some way. So there's a story that I love that's told about when John F. Kennedy visited NASA in 1962, and he, ran into a janitor in the hallway, and he asked the janitor, sir, what are you doing here? What's your job here? And the janitor responded saying, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. So, it doesn't matter what our specific tasks are day to day, we can all reframe them in more meaningful ways, whether it's, helping to put a man on the moon if you're a janitor, or, helping to support your family with the income that you make here.
Thank you. And it means that if you're in a company, if you believe in what the company is doing, but think you don't directly have an effect, you're helping a team, you're helping those around you. If you can understand who you're helping, then you realize you do have a meaning.
Exactly.
Can you tell us about the next pillar, storytelling, and why that's so important?
So storytelling it has to do with your own life story, and it's the act of taking your own experiences and weaving them into a narrative that explains who you are and where you came from and where you're going. Mm-hmm. It's this kind of personal myth that you tell about yourself. And a lot of people, I think, don't necessarily realize that they have the power to tell their own stories and that they're the authors of their own stories. And, if you don't like the story that you're telling about your life, you can always change it. In narrative therapy, one of the common exercises is, the psychologist will put kind of dots on a whiteboard, mm-hmm. and he'll say, okay, so imagine these dots are your experiences. Now, you wake up one morning and you realize that you have an appointment coming up that you'd completely forgotten about. You're not ready for it. You have to go to it, but you're not ready. So you're getting ready. So that's one dot. You circle that dot. You forgot the appointment. So you're getting ready, and as you're getting ready and rushing out the door, you drop the keys and you're kind of fumbling around, and it's like taking you way longer than it should to get to your car. So that's the second dot. that you can circle. And then when you get to the car, you realize, oh gosh, I had meant to fill up the car yesterday with gas and I forgot, and now I have to do it now. I'm going to be even more late to my appointment. So then you circle that third dot. And then you start telling a story about yourself. You connect the dots and you say, I'm a screw up. Like, I can't do anything right. I'm always running late. This is why, I can't find like a husband, or, whatever the case may be. And in narrative psychology, so in narrative therapy, they're like, well, okay, that's one story, but what about all these other dots? Like, what do those say about you? So, if you're telling a negative story, you're not stuck in like this rut of like, oh God, like my life sucks, like my life is meaningless. You can always reframe the story by focusing on different aspects of it, drawing lessons from it, putting new themes onto it based on the experiences that you did live, but just having like a different frame on them, or even ending the story in a different way. So psychologists have found that people leading meaningful lives tend to tell redemptive stories about their lives. So they tell stories that move from bad to good. So I had something really terrible happen, and yet it was redeemed by the fact that I ultimately grew as a result of it, became more compassionate, found my purpose. And the interesting thing about these kinds of stories is that what really defines them is where the story ends. So let's say that, you tell that story, of you kind of messing up in the morning. You could end it, there being like, okay, I always mess up. Or you could end it somewhere else. Let's say that running late for your appointment caused you to, drive by a person who turned out to be, an old high school friend of yours, and you guys ended up like reconnecting after, 20 years, and now you're best friends. So you could end the story there and make it a redemptive story. So you screwed up, you're running late. But that, the good thing that resulted was, seeing this old friend of yours.
Woohoo! I like to say it's really about the universe working for you and through you rather than to you. Okay, these things happened, but you don't even know all the pieces, all the mechanism in place that's taking place, for instance, so you didn't get smacked by the bus in the intersection because instead you came 30 seconds later.
Right, exactly.
So let's go to the next pillar then, transcendence. And what's a star party?
A star party. So this is a party that I attended at the McDonald Observatory in West Texas. So the observatory it's all the way out in West Texas. It takes like hours to get there from the nearest airport. And the reason it's so difficult to get to is because that's where some of the darkest night skies in the U.S. are, which is important if you want to, look at stars and research them and go stargazing. So the observatory, in addition to kind of being this research facility, is a place that hosts these star parties, which are basically stargazing parties where, hundreds of people can come, and they're kind of led through this, we all sat in this amphitheater, and we were led through a show where the guide kind of had this like clicker that was like this laser that went all the way up to the sky and pointed out the constellations to us, told us how old different stars are. And then afterwards we went out and looked into the telescopes at like, sites in the galaxy and in the, broader universe like Saturn and two galaxies colliding. It was just a really, awe-inspiring experience to realize how big the world is and how small you are by comparison.
Thank you. And along those lines, what did researcher Michelle Chioda and colleagues learn about how awe affects the sense of ourself?
So they found that when people experience awe, their sense of self grows smaller because, like to go back to the example of the star party, when you realize, that the universe is so big and so beautiful and so, awe-inspiring, really, like it makes you feel a lot smaller. And other researchers found that sense of smallness is also attended by a sense of feeling of connectedness to the world around you. So it's like, oh gosh, I'm so small. And that can kind of be a scary realization, but it's attended by this idea like, oh gosh, I'm small, but I'm also connected to this world that is so much bigger than me. And that's kind of where the meaning comes from. You realize, yes, like my life is small, but it's part of this bigger tapestry.
Thank you. On those lines, can you tell us about Jeff Ashby and what he saw from space and what he was feeling?
Yeah, so Jeff was a former astronaut who went into space, and he saw the Earth from space and had kind of a transcendent experience. He said, like, when you're out there and you see the world from space, you realize that the countries, that there are no borders between them. The borders that we've created are artificial. You realize that, what happens on one side of the planet can easily affect what happens on the other. You realize how thin the layer of ozone and atmosphere is that's separating the world and all life that's on it from the empty void of space. And it was an experience that really kind of shifted his values. Other astronauts have had this experience, and it's been dubbed the overview effect. When you see the Earth from space, it's so awe-inspiring that it just kind of shifts your values away from kind of achievement and materialism and self-oriented values towards ones that are related to leading a more meaningful life. And that's exactly what happened to Jeff.
Thank you. And from there, maybe we can go from outer space to inner space and meditation.
Yeah. So, you don't have to travel to space to experience awe and transcendence. You can do it in the privacy of your own home by meditating. Meditating, it's a practice that concentrates the mind, and that if you do it enough and you have enough, if you kind of devote yourself to it, it can even lead to, transcendent experiences. They can be major transcendent experiences like, mystics and monks have had throughout the years, where your sense of self just completely evaporates, disappears, and you feel connected to God or to a higher reality, whatever you want to call it. Or it could be more minor, where, maybe you don't feel that. Maybe you do feel like, okay, I'm still here, like, Emily and Michael, like, I'm still intact, but my sense of self is a little smaller. I've kind of opened up a little bit and feel more connected to the world around me.
Thank you. And when you think about meditation, it's interesting that you talk about a small sense of self, but that small sense of self, in a sense, is a letting go of you're able to see more of the big picture when you're small.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about it, like, as a metaphor, it almost makes sense. Like, the smaller you get, like, the bigger vantage point you have, like, on the world around you. And William James, the American philosopher and psychologist, wrote a lot about transcendent mystical experiences, and he identified a number of qualities about them. And one of the qualities he identified was that they are noetic, as he called it, which means that they impart knowledge on you. So you kind of, go up and have this transcendent experience, and you come back with a different perspective on the world.
Beautiful. Do you have a meditation practice, out of curiosity?
I do try to meditate regularly, and often I'm usually just sitting there like, God, help me clear my mind.
and I like to say any meditation, even the worst meditation, is a perfect meditation.
Yeah.
So let's go from there and let's talk about the dinner party.
A big part of leading a meaningful life is knowing how to find meaning in adversity. So we're all going to suffer. We're all going to experience adversity and trauma. And we have to be able to figure out how these experiences fit into the broader mosaic of our lives if we want to lead meaningful lives. So the dinner party is a community of young adults, most of them in their 20s, who have lost a parent to an untimely death. These young people started getting together because they realized there's really no venues where they can kind of talk about death and their parents' death. Death is so kind of anesthetized and ignored in our culture. And so they started getting together to talk about this shared experience of losing someone you love sooner than you thought you would. And it turns out that this community has provided them with a sense of belonging. It's helped them kind of grow through the adversity, experience what psychologists call post-traumatic growth.
Thank you. What are sense makers?
Sense makers are people who have spent a lot of time reflecting on the adversity or the trauma that they experienced. And they've, as a result of that, been able to integrate that kind of blip in their narrative into their story. So they have figured out, they've devoted themselves to kind of crafting a narrative around the adversity and trying to understand, why it happened, how it changed them, what they learned from it. And so people who do this in research, when they come in for studies and they kind of just sit there and they start writing about their adversity and trying to make sense of it, they ultimately end up kind of moving forward past the trauma in healthier ways.
How do we become more resilient? And I'm using that word in particular so that we are able to actually put the mirror there and look at the trauma.
A big part of it is having those 4 pillars of meaning that I talked about already relatively strong in your life, because if they're strong and an adversity hits, then your kind of psychological infrastructure won't be as kind of shaken because you have these strong foundations. So people who experience, trauma or adversity, who have strong relationships, end up weathering it much better. If they have a purpose, they end up weathering it much better. So really making sure that those pillars are strong in your life when the going is good helps you when the going gets rough.
Woohoo! Can you tell us about Joan Jake and Life is Good?
Life is Good is one of my favorite companies. They're an apparel brand, so they sell these T-shirts and these hats that say life is good on them. And their purpose is to spread the power of optimism. So they're a really kind of meaning-driven, purpose-driven company. And one of the things that is happening in our culture today is that a lot of businesses, organizations of all kinds, from schools to hospitals to businesses, are starting to reorient themselves towards meaning, towards how they can provide their, individual employees with meaning or students with meaning, and how they can provide their consumers with meaning. And so Life is Good is a good example. As the company got going, they started receiving these letters from their consumers who were wearing their products and buying them that said, basically, I've gone through something really hard. Like I had cancer. I lost my husband in 9/11. I had a limb amputated. And yet wearing your shirts and your hats helped me get through it because it was that positive, hopeful, optimistic message that I needed to help me get through a difficult time. Eventually, the leaders of Life is Good started taking those letters and reading them at company-wide meetings and events so that the people who worked there could realize that what they did at the company was having this broader impact in the world. And so it was helping infuse their own day-to-day tasks with meaning because they knew that it was towards the purpose of this larger thing.
Awesome. Jessica, my wife, she's the producer. And each evening, I'm pretty worn out. It's a daily show. We're 543 episodes in. And she's like, well, when you're exhausted, go to your YouTube channel and look at the positive comments because it helps bring meaning to everything that you're doing and then sets the tone for a great night's sleep.
Yeah. That's great.
Can you tell us real briefly about Breitbart and meaning-centered psychotherapy for the terminally ill?
So I mentioned earlier that there is this kind of movement towards meaning that's happening at all levels of society. And this work of William Breitbart, who's a doctor at Sloan Memorial Kettering Cancer Center in New York, is a wonderful example. So Dr. Breitbart treats patients who are at the end of their lives. They've received a terminal cancer diagnosis and they know they're going to die. And a lot of them end up feeling a deep sense of despair and terror at the prospect of their own death. Some of them even conclude that they don't want to live anymore. They want to, get a prescription for hastened death, as it's called, or, they just are giving up on life. And so Breitbart wanted to see, wait a second, what's going on here? What's driving them to give up on life like this? And he conducted some research and found that it's a sense that their lives weren't meaningful. So he created a psychotherapy program to help them kind of find meaning in life and lead meaningful lives until the very end. And it's the program that you asked about. And what it does is it kind of asks people to reflect on their life story. It has them reflect on, what their legacy is, how they want to be remembered. It has them create something like a project, whether it's like a work of art or a book or something else that they can leave behind in the world so it'll continue existing after they're gone. And what Breitbart has found is that the people who go through this program do end up feeling like their lives are more meaningful. They end up reporting higher quality in life. So it's like the idea for all of us is that, you could be facing the most despairing news, the most horrible news that you could get, which is that you're going to die soon. And yet you can still craft a life that matters even in the midst of all that.
I think that's huge. If you can give people meaning, even in their last days, then it means that everybody who's listening to the show who aren't probably on their last days can certainly find more meaning as well.
Exactly. I mean, if they can find it, then we can in our less kind of trying circumstances.
Thank you. Can you tell us about the epiphany Viktor Frankl had in a Nazi concentration camp about love?
Yeah, so it's basically the same thing. He was in a terrible situation in the, degrading, undignifying in the concentration camps. And yet he found that people who found meaning in their suffering, people could find meaning in their suffering. And for Frankl, he realized one day as he was kind of, doing the labor and being yelled at by the Nazis, these whips kind of cracking behind him, that even in the midst of that, he could allow his mind to turn to thoughts of love. So he started thinking about his wife. And he realized in that moment that the meaning of life, as all the poets have talked about, all the philosophers have talked about, really lies in love. And that was the conclusion of my book as well, because if you look at all the stories that I told, all the research, meaning really lies in the connections that you form with others and in the acts of service and grace and compassion that you give to the world.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. What words of wisdom would you share for parents, for their kids, on helping their kids to find meaning?
It's so much simpler than it sounds like. Like meaning, it seems like this grand esoteric pursuit, but literally, if parents just sat down with their kids and asked them, what do you want to do to contribute to the world? How do you want to make the world a better place? That their kids will start thinking more in terms of purpose than in terms of how they want to, be famous or, become Instagram stars and things like that. I mean, literally, there's research showing that if you just ask kids, how do you want to contribute to the world? How do your goals end up contributing to the world? That they end up being more motivated in school, they do better academically, all these good outcomes.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. For there, a few quick wrap-up questions. First off, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Well, it's my family, my husband, my parents, my little brother, and my friends.
Awesome. Where can people go to find out more and to find your beautiful book?
My website, emilyesfahanismith.com, is where you can order my book. You can also email me. Feel free to email me. I always respond. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook there.
Fantastic. And if you're driving down the road and you didn't catch that, come on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to Emily as well. So before we let you go, and thank you, this has been a beautiful interview. I love your book, by the way. I love it. We have so many people. It's the number one question people come to me with coaching, or they come and email us on the show, is how do I figure out my purpose and direction in life?
Yeah. And
so this book is really incredibly important for people.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I hope that it helps people lead more meaningful lives. That's why I wrote it.
Awesome. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
If you're struggling with, what is my meaning? How can I lead a meaningful life? I would just begin by asking yourself, what's one thing I can do to make the life of somebody else better? And then go out and do that. Like, meaning is all about contributing and connecting. So go out and just give someone a compliment, have a conversation with that barista at Starbucks, empty the dishwasher for your husband or wife. Meaning lies in these small acts of generosity and love that end up lighting up the world.
Woohoo! Well, thank you so much, Emily. This has been fantastic.
Thanks, Michael. It's been wonderful for me.
For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the power of meaning, and craft a life that matters, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you, Emily.
Oh, thanks, Michael. That was great.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!